and there is a poison that tastes like honey when you first swallow it. It feels righteous, powerful, and necessary. But within moments, it turns to ash in your gut and burning through the lining of your soul until nothing remains but regret. That poison is the belief that your rage is a weapon, when in reality, and it is the very chain that binds you to the people you despise. The grand furnace of Oakhaven was not merely a workshop, it was a beast that breathed fire and ate silence, and the air inside always tasted of sulfur and singed hair, a thick, heavy atmosphere that sat in the lungs like lead. Here, the glassblowers were not just artisans, and they were tamers of the elemental, turning sand and ash into transparent miracles. And among them, Elias was the most talented and the most volatile. And Elias stood before the glory hole of the furnace, his face illuminated by the orange roar of the flames. Sweat rivered down his soot-stained temples, stinging his eyes, but he did not blink. On the end of his blowpipe sat a globule of molten glass, glowing like a captured star. He was attempting the impossible, the Seraphim's tear, and a vase so delicate, so impossibly thin, that a harsh breath could shatter it before it even cooled. Steady, he whispered to himself, and his muscles coiled tight as violin strings. The workshop was a symphony of industrial noise. Hammers clanged against anvils in the metalwork section, and the bellows wheezed like a dying giant, and the heavy boots of the apprentices crunched over stray shards of silica on the stone floor. Elias hated the noise, and he hated the heat. But most of all, he hated the people. To his left stood Jaron, a clumsy, thick-fingered man who hummed incessantly while he worked, and the humming was off-key, a droning buzz that drilled straight into Elias's ear canal and rattled his concentration. Every time Jaron hit a low note, and Elias felt a spike of adrenaline shoot through his chest. "Shut up," Elias thought, the words screaming in his mind. "Just shut up and work." He rotated the pipe, and the glass stretching like honey. It was perfect. The symmetry was divine. He just needed 10 more seconds of absolute focus to crimp the rim. And, "Did you hear about the baker's daughter?" Jaron's voice cut through the air, loud and grating, addressing another worker across the room. "Ran off with the butcher," and laughter erupted. A jagged, raucous sound that bounced off the stone walls. Elias felt the heat in his chest rise hotter than the furnace in front of him, and his heart hammered against his ribs. "They are doing this on purpose," he told himself. "They know I am at the critical moment. They are disrespectful, ignorant fools." And his grip on the iron pipe tightened. His knuckles turned white. The anger wasn't just a feeling, it was a physical possession. It seized his diaphragm, and shortening his breath. His hand, usually steady as a surgeon's, gave a microscopic tremor. Snap. The neck of the Seraphim's tear sheared off, and the molten glass collapsed in on itself, transforming from a masterpiece into a deformed, glowing lump of waste. The laughter in the room didn't stop, and which only made the silence inside Elias's head more deafening. He spun around, the ruined glass still smoking on the end of his rod. "Quiet!" Elias roared, and his voice cracking with the strain. The workshop fell silent instantly. 20 pairs of eyes turned to look at him. Jaron stood there, mouth half open, and holding a bucket of water. "Can you not possess a single ounce of discipline?" Elias screamed, stepping forward, brandishing the pipe like a spear. "I am creating art here, and I am trying to elevate us from dirt to divinity. And you stand there gossip-mongering like fishwives." "Elias, it was just a joke," Jaron stammered, stepping back. "And we didn't know you were at the crimp." "You never know. You never look. You are selfish." Elias hurled the pipe onto the stone floor. The hot glass shattered, and sending shards skittering across the room like diamond caltrops. "I cannot work in this asylum. You are all suffocating me." From the shadows of the upper gantry, a slow and rhythmic clapping echoed. Master Thorn descended the iron spiral staircase. He was an ancient man, his skin textured like old parchment, his eyes milky but piercing, and he walked with a cane made of twisted obsidian. He stopped in front of Elias, looking at the shattered glass, then at the red-faced apprentice. "Another failure, and Elias?" Thorn asked softly. "It wasn't my fault." Elias spat, pointing a shaking finger at Jaron. "He distracted me. He has no respect for the craft. If he hadn't spoken, and the tear would be finished. He ruined it." Thorn looked at Jaron, then back to Elias. Jaron merely spoke. "You are the one who dropped the glass, and—"
"Because he made me angry."
"He made you." Thorn raised an eyebrow. "Is Jaron a sorcerer?" Does he hold the strings to your nervous system, or are you simply a puppet who dances whenever someone hums a tune you dislike? Elias clenched his jaw. You don't understand, master. I need silence. I need perfection, and I cannot control my hands when the world is chaotic. Then you will never be a master. Thorn said, his voice cold and final. Go home, cool your head, and do not return until you understand who actually broke the glass. Elias stormed out into the cobblestone streets of Oak Haven. It was raining, a cold and miserable drizzle that mixed with the soot of the city to create a black sludge. He pulled his collar up, shivering, but his internal temperature was still boiling, and he walked aggressively, shouldering past pedestrians. Every person he passed felt like an antagonist. A carriage driver splashed mud near his boots, and an Elias cursed him to hell. A merchant haggling over fish blocked the sidewalk, and Elias shoved past with a sneer. The world is full of idiots, he thought bitterly, and if people would just get out of my way, if they would just stop being so incompetent, so loud, so thoughtless, I would be at peace. I would be great. He reached his small and cramped apartment and slammed the door. He paced the floorboards, replaying the scene in the workshop over and over. In his mind, the scene shifted, and Jaren's humming became louder, more malicious. The laughter became mocking. Elias rewrote the memory until he was the undeniable victim and the tragic genius surrounded by saboteurs. He poured himself a cup of stale wine and sat by the window, watching the rain streak the glass. He felt exhausted, and the anger had drained his energy, leaving him hollow and depressed. This was the cycle. The explosion, the justification, the exhaustion, the loneliness. And he wanted to be calm. He truly did. He admired the stillness of the ocean, the stoicism of the mountains. But people were impossible, and how could anyone remain calm when surrounded by such stupidity? 3 days passed before he dared to return to the foundry. He needed the money, and more than that, and he needed the glass. It was his addiction. When he entered, the atmosphere was tense. The other workers avoided his gaze. Jaren moved to the far side of the room, and Elias felt a pang of guilt, quickly smothered by his pride. Better they fear me and stay quiet, he reasoned. Master Thorn beckoned him to the main kiln, and, the Duke has requested a commission, Thorn said, not looking at Elias. A set of 6 goblets, clear as ice, strong as steel, and he demands them by sunset tonight for a banquet. Elias's eyes widened. That is a master's job. I am old, and my hands ache today. Thorn lied, and his face unreadable. You have the best hands in the city, Elias, when they are not shaking with temper. Can you do this? Yes, Elias said immediately. I can, and there is a condition, Thorn said. You will work in the courtyard. Elias balked. But master, it is market day. The street runs right past the gates, and the noise, the people. The furnace in the courtyard is the only one hot enough for this specific mixture, Thorn said. Take it or leave it. Elias swallowed hard, and he looked at the high wages written on the scroll. He looked at the glory of the task. I will do it. He set up his station in the open-air courtyard, and the heat of the furnace was comforting. But the environment was a nightmare. Through the iron gates, the city of Oak Haven was screaming. Vendors shouted prices, and children shrieked as they chased stray dogs. Carts rattled over stones. Elias tried to block it out. Focus on the fire, he chanted internally. Focus on the breath, and he successfully blew the first 3 goblets. They were magnificent. He pulled a rhythm building. He was proving them wrong. He was proving he could handle it. But then, a group of street performers set up right outside the gate. A juggler and man playing a horrific, screeching bagpipe. The sound clawed at Elias's spine, and it was a high-pitched wail that seemed to vibrate in his teeth. He paused, the 4th goblet glowing on his pipe. He closed his eyes, trying to breathe, but the bagpipe grew louder. He's doing it to annoy me, Elias thought irrationally. He sees me working, and he's playing louder. A crowd gathered to watch the juggler, and they cheered and clapped. A small boy, face smudged with dirt, pressed his face against the iron bars of the courtyard gate, staring at Elias. Hey, mister, the boy yelled, and make a dragon. Elias ignored him. He was sweating profusely. The vein in his forehead pulsed. Hey, Mr. Glassman, make a dragon! And the cups are boring. The boy shouted again, banging a stick against the metal bars. Clang, clang. The rhythm broke Elias's concentration. The bagpipes screeched, and the crowd roared. The stick banged against the iron. It was too much. The wave of rage crashed over him, bigger and darker than ever before. It wasn't just annoyance, and it was hatred. Hatred for the boy, the piper, the city, the world that refused to let him be great. Elias spun around, his face twisted into a mask of fury, and he marched toward the gate, the red-hot goblet still on the end of the pipe. "Get away!" he screamed, thrusting the pipe toward the bars to scare the boy, but he moved too fast. The centrifugal force of the swing dislodged the heavy molten glass. It flew off the end of the pipe, sailing through the gaps in the iron bars, and time seemed to slow down. Elias watched in horror as the glowing red projectile missed the boy by inches, landing in the juggler's open instrument case, and which was lined with velvet and filled with straw props. Instantly, smoke billowed up. The straw caught fire. The crowd screamed and scattered, and the juggler frantically stomped on his case, shouting curses at Elias. Elias stood frozen, the empty pipe hanging from his hand. He hadn't meant to, and he just wanted them to stop. He just wanted quiet. He felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Master Thorn. The old man didn't look angry. He looked sad, and, "You almost killed a child, Elias," Thorn whispered. The quietness of his voice was more terrifying than any shout. They wouldn't stop. Elias stammered, and tears of panic pricking his eyes. The noise, the stick. "You are a danger to yourself and this city," Thorn said. "Pack your tools. You are done at the foundry, and do not return."
"Master, please! I can fix it! I'll pay for the case!"
"You cannot pay for the lack of a soul." Thorn turned his back, and, "A man who cannot command his own mind is not a man, he is a leaf in the wind, and I will not have a leaf working with fire." Elias was escorted out of the gates, and he stood on the street, the very street he hated, surrounded by the charred remains of the juggler's case and the angry glares of the crowd. He was alone, truly alone, and he had lost his livelihood, his reputation, and his purpose. He walked to the river edge, under the great stone bridge where the beggars slept. He sat in the mud and staring at the gray, churning water. He wanted to scream, to punch the earth, to blame the boy, blame Thorn, blame the bagpiper. But as the sun set, and leaving him in the cold dark, a terrifying thought finally pierced through his armor of self-righteousness. The bagpiper didn't know I was there. The boy was just playing, and Thorn gave me a chance. He looked at his hands, the hands that could create beauty, now clenched into useless fists. It wasn't them, he whispered to the rushing water, and it was never them. Elias didn't leave the city. Leaving would have been running, and running teaches nothing. Instead, he walked straight into the belly of the beast and the Oakhaven fish market at dawn. He found work not as an artist, but as a gutter, a man who stands knee-deep in brine and blood, and slicing open cod while the world screams around him. It was a hellscape of sensory overload. The smell of rotting seaweed was thick enough to taste, and fishmongers shouted prices with voices like gravel in a blender. Seagulls bombed the stalls, screeching incessantly. Customers haggled, spat, and shoved, and for the first week, Elias felt the old rage bubbling up every hour. And when a customer threw a slippery eel back at him, because it was too small, Elias's hand gripped his knife until the handle creaked. He wanted to scream, and he wanted to flip the table. But then, he remembered the boy's face. He remembered the fire. He remembered the silence of Master Thorn. "If I react," Elias told himself, and forcing his breath out slowly through his nose, "I am a puppet. The customer pulls the string, and I dance. I am done dancing." He developed a ritual, and every time the world tried to provoke him, a rude comment, a shove, a loud noise, he visualized a heavy iron door in his mind. The noise would hit the door, but it would not enter the room where he lived. He focused entirely on the knife in his hand. Slice. Clean. Next, months passed. The winter turned to spring, and Elias's hands grew rough, scarred by scales and salt. But his eyes changed. The frantic, darting look of a prey animal was gone. In its place was a stillness, and deep and unnerving. One afternoon, a drunk merchant stumbled into Elias's stall, knocking over a crate of expensive oysters. The shells shattered. The merchant laughed, and a wet, ugly sound, and pointed a finger at Elias. "Look at you, glass boy, for making art to cleaning garbage. That's all you're worth." And old Elias would have broken the man's nose. The market went quiet, waiting for the explosion. Elias simply crouched down. He picked up the surviving oysters one by one, and he didn't look angry. He didn't even look annoyed. He looked at the merchant with a mild curiosity, as if observing a noisy bird. "You have spilled your coin, and sir," Elias said calmly, "but the oysters are still fresh. Would you like me to wash them for you?" The merchant blinked, confused by the lack of resistance, and the venom in his throat had nowhere to go. He muttered a clumsy apology, paid for a damage, and hurried away, shamed by Elias's dignity. That night, Elias washed the fish scales from his arms and walked back to the grand furnace. He didn't know if he would be welcomed, but he knew he was ready, and the scene at the foundry was chaotic. A storm was battering Oakhaven, the worst in a decade. Thunder shook the cobblestones, and the wind howled like a banshee through the narrow streets. Inside the workshop, panic reigned. Master Thorn was slumped in a chair, his face gray, clutching his chest, and around him, the other glassblowers were shouting, running back and forth with buckets of sand. "What is happening?" Elias grabbed Jaren by the shoulder, and Jaren looked terrified. "The lighthouse?" The gale blew out the lantern room windows. The great prism shattered. "Without the light, and the fleet returning from the north will crash onto the jagged rocks. They'll all drown. We have to blow a replacement," Elias said, looking at the furnace, and, "We can't." Jaren yelled over a clap of thunder. "Thorn is ill. And the rest of us, look at the storm. The pressure changes, the wind drafting down the chimney, and the glass is unstable. It keeps cracking." Elias looked at the glory hole. The fire was roaring, spitting inconsistent flames due to the wind outside, and it was the worst possible condition for glassblowing. It was loud, dangerous, and unpredictable. It was perfect. Elias walked over to the rack of tools, and he picked up his old blowpipe. It felt heavy and familiar, like shaking hands with an old friend. "Elias, you can't," Jaren warned. "You're banned," and, "Get out of my way," Elias said. But he didn't shout it. He said it with the quiet authority of a falling tree. He stepped up to the furnace. The heat blasted him, and drying the rain on his skin instantly. He gathered the molten gather, a massive, glowing lung of glass. He needed to shape a lens thick in the center, and perfectly tapered at the edges, flawless enough to magnify a candle into a beacon. The storm raged. A shutter banged violently against the wall, bung, bungy, and Jaren flinched. The other workers ducked. Elias didn't blink. He incorporated the rhythm of the banging shutter into his turning. Turn. Bang. Turn. Bang. And he's crazy, someone whispered. "It's too loud." Elias closed his eyes. He didn't shut the noise out, he let it pass through him. The thunder was just a vibration, and the shouting of the men was just sound waves. The heat was just energy. None of it was personal. None of it was trying to hurt him. It simply was. He blew into the pipe, and his breath steady and long. The glass expanded. He took the wet wooden block to shape it. Steam hissed and screamed, a high-pitched shriek that usually drove him mad. Now, and it sounded like music. He worked for an hour, entering a state of flow so felt he wasn't even in the room. He was the glass. He was the fire. He was the storm. And when he finally cracked the finished lens off the pipe and placed it into the annealing oven, the room was dead silent. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath, and Master Thorn, who had been watching from his chair, struggled to his feet. He walked over, leaning heavily on his cane, and peered into the oven. The lens sat there, and cooling, optically perfect, a masterpiece born in a hurricane. Thorn turned to Elias. The old man's eyes were wet. "The storm is screaming," Thorn whispered, "and the men are panicking. The world is falling apart." How did you keep your hands so steady?" Elias wiped the soot from his forehead. He looked at Jaren, and who was staring at him with awe, not fear. "I realize something, Master," Elias said softly. "The fire outside doesn't matter. The noise doesn't matter, and the only fire that burns you is the one you let inside." They rushed the lens to the lighthouse. It was installed just as the first ships of the fleet saw the rocks, and the beam cut through the dark rain, guiding 300 men to safety. Elias was manstated as the master glassblower of Oakhaven, and he went on to create works that kings and emperors fought to own. But his greatest creation was never made of glass, and his greatest creation was the atmosphere he carried with him. Years later, apprentices would watch him work. They would see him drop a tool or see a clumsy worker bump into him, or hear a sudden crash of thunder. They would brace themselves for the shout, for the anger. But Elias would simply pause, and he would take one breath, and he would continue untouched. The moral of the story, and you are walking through a life filled with noise. There will always be a Jaren humming off key. There will always be traffic, rude comments, unexpected bills, and plans that fail. If you treat every inconvenience as a personal attack, You will spend your entire life burning in a furnace of your own making, and you will shatter your own potential, just like Elias shattered the Seraphim's tear. Anger is not power. Anger is a leak, and it is your energy bleeding out because you lack the discipline to keep your vessel sealed. True power is the ability to look at the chaos, the disrespect, and the storm, and say, "This cannot touch me unless I allow it." Do not be the glass that shatters at the slightest vibration, and be the fire that consumes the obstacle and uses it as fuel. If this story helped you find a moment of calm in your chaotic day, and subscribe to Mindset Millionaire for more stories that sharpen the mind and strengthen the soul. Peace is not a place you find. It is a decision you make. Make it today.